Why spey fishing? Well, there's lots of reasons. And number one, it's fun. A lot of people think that you can only catch salmon or steelhead with a spey rod, and that's not true. You can catch trout, you can catch bass, you can catch all kinds of things. Fish all your casts. Celebrate the bycatch. Welcome to the United Women on the Fly September virtual meeting. We're here just to begin your spey journey. And my name is Heather Hodson. I go by the pronoun she, her. I'm the founder of United Women on the Fly. And my spey journey, I think I caught my first steelhead in 2012. So I'm almost 10 years in, but sometimes I won't cast for an entire year. So I feel like a complete newbie when I get back onto the river for the first time. So know that even those that have fished quite a bit, we all have to like kind of brush off the cobwebs every time we get out on the water. I think that there's a lot of spey misconceptions. And so I want to just clear some of these up. One of the biggest misconceptions that I felt personally was that I had to cast really far. I would see people that could cast, and I was feeling like I was inept and I wasn't able to be as good as they were because I couldn't cast as far. And it's okay if you can't cast too far yet. And then as you just practice and get better and better, you'll be able to cast further. But honestly, I've been probably the most successful with my shorter casts. The other thing too is need a special fly rod. Yes, you can have and use a spey rod, which is a two-handed fly rod. And I'll get into that a little bit more here in a second, but you can do these same fishing techniques with a single hand rod. So you can do a snap tee, you can do a single hand, you can do all kinds of stuff. You can swing a fly, you can swing a nymph, you can swing a soft tackle, a wet fly. I even swing my dries and skate them across. So you can do all of that with a single hand rod as well. And the third misconception is, and I wish I would have known this, but is that you must be a good caster before you learn to spey cast. And I actually think it's the other way around. I wish that I would have learned how to spey cast before I learned how to single hand cast, because my nickname is Top Hand Hodson. And that, because when you're using a spey rod, it's all lever and moving your bottom hand, but I use my top hand because I single hand cast. And so Top Hand Hodson is my nickname, so, and I own it, and I try, but just know that we're not all perfect. And I wish I would have learned how to spey cast before single hand casting. So give it a try and just see what happens. Why spey fishing? Well, there's lots of reasons. And number one, it's fun, right? So if you just listen to Demiesha and Jaeda, that was the first things, that it's fun, keep it fun, don't be so serious. And I think that's what it's about, is just having fun. The other is you can catch multiple species. I think people, and feeling connected. I think for me, that's one of the biggest things is really your fly and your whole body and your whole line, you're always connected to the water until you come to your key position and you cast forward. You are always in touch with the water. And it kind of sounds cliche, but I feel so connected with the water, with the earth, with everything when I'm spey fishing. And it's just a really magical feeling and a magical way to cast a fly rod. Tight quarters. So let's say that you have a bunch of brush or trees behind you and you can't pick up and single hand cast or cast behind you. Really, spey casting is kind of a glorified roll cast, truly. So if you're in tight quarters, you can really use a spey rod to cast far, but really utilize the water in front of you. And you can cover big water. So if you look at this specific river that Angelica is fishing on, like it's pretty wide. And so the cool thing about a spey rod is with minimal effort, you can actually cast quite a ways. And it's really not that hard to cast that far if you get the fundamentals of your cast down, and you can cover a lot of water. And finally, just learning a new technique. There's so many great things to have, so many tools in your toolbox, right? So when this is Lindsay, and her and I were out on the Gallatin in Montana last week, and this is a single hand rod she's using. We had a chubby Chernobyl, which is a dry fly. We had a longer dropper, about 3 feet, and we would cast it out, cast it really short. She would high stick that dry fly, and the fish would come up for the dry, but then we would start to kind of follow our fly, and then we'd let that nymph swing out, and she caught 6 fish in a row. And so it was really cool because she had never fished this way. And, you know, I always am thinking about where is my fly within the water column. You know, if I'm down, I'm high sticking, it's a deep dead drift. That means it's going to be lower in the water column. As it starts to swing out, it's starting to raise up. And a lot of those mayfly emergers and caddis pupa, that's part of what is happening when they're starting to emerge and become adults. So you're actually fishing that specific stage of that bug's life. And she was super successful. So just know that learning a new technique is just fun, and it's just going to make you a better angler. Now, how I'm breaking this presentation up kind of into tackle, casting, and then fishing techniques, landing the fish, and that's it. So first, we'll just kind of talk a little bit about some tackle. And there's really 4 types of fly rods. So spey rods, micro speys, a switch rod, and a single hand rod. So I'm not going to get into, you know, great detail about all of this because I could probably talk about 4 hours on just this subject alone. However, a spey rod and a micro spey are going to be rods that you use with your 2 hands. So you're going to be casting with your 2 hands, and it's kind of a lever, pull, push, pull, push type of casting. And most of your spey rods are going to be anywhere from like 12 feet to 14 plus feet. Now with your micro spey, it's just a micro, so it's just a smaller baby spey rod. And anyone that's used a micro spey, they are so fun. And then you have a switch rod. So a switch rod can either be a single hand casting rod and or it can be a 2-handed casting rod. It's great if you want to nymph far away, so you can use a specific line and really get it out there with a good D loop and have an indicator on it. We do that a lot on Pyramid Lake. We'll use a switch rod just with that specific type of cast. Or you can do a single hand spey, or you can even pick up and cast. So a switch rod can be useful for different techniques as well. And then finally, we have our single hand rod, which we all know, you know, usually 6 feet to 11 feet, 0 all the way up to 14 weight rods. And again, as I mentioned, you don't need a spey rod, right? You can do this entire technique and swing a fly. You can swing a dry, you can swing a nymph, you can swing a sweat fly, you can swing a streamer, you can, you know, you can swing all of these different types of flies with this specific technique. So you can do single hand and or 2-hand. And choosing the right rod. So there's a lot of things to consider, and this is especially even when you're single hand fishing as well, you know, like what size flies will I be fishing? What size river? What size fish? Am I going to be going top water, mid surface, or down below? You know, thinking about all of these different things. But truly the most important thing to think about when you are considering a spey rod is what is the fly size? What fly size are you going to be casting? So thinking if you're going to be swinging a small little tiny soft tackle, which would be like a mayfly emerger or a caddis pupa, you know, those are pretty small flies. So you could get away with a 0 weight or a 1 weight or 2 weight micro spey rod. Whereas if you're going to be fishing a big, huge king salmon fly, you're going to be needing either a 9 weight and or a 10 weight fly rod or spey rod to cast those flies. So again, number 1 thing for a spey rod is going to be what size flies are you going to be fishing most? And that'll help determine average spey rod size for kind of average size big trout or average steelhead, and even some salmon is going to be a 7 weight spey rod. When I'm going king salmon fishing, I'm using a 9 and a 10 weight spey rod. And then if I'm going to go swing some little soft tackles, I'm using like a 0 weight micro spey. So again, it all depended on what size fly are you going to be casting. So leaders. Leaders are, you know, if you fished any streamers, you know that your streamer leader is usually shorter than your dry fly and or your nymph setup. So a streamer leader, which is going to be for a Skagit head, is going to be monofilament or fluorocarbon. I just go straight up 4 to 6 feet. And then I tie either perfection loop or a king sling loop, and then I just go loop to loop connections. So again, for a Skagit head, which is going to be, you're going to be fishing tips, so you're going to be going somewhat subsurface, you want to use a shorter leader. Whereas if you were to use a floating head or a hybrid head, you want to use a poly leader. And when you're using these different heads that float, you want your leader to be 1.5 times the length of your spey rod. And I'll get more into that here in a second. And then using a non-slip loop knot. So that just gives it a little more just natural presentation when you're swinging that fly. And I'll tell you, I use a non-slip loop knot for my dries, for my nymphs, for my streamers. I use non-slip loop knot all the time, super fast. Very strong, and it's easy and it works. Now, poly leaders, I'll go into this a little bit, and I do want to say, you know, for those that want to dive deeper into spey fishing, there are Skagit heads, there are Scandi heads, there are long belly, there are mid belly, there are all of these different lines. Some float, some sink. You have floating leaders, you have sinking tips. And again, in that class, that 2-week class that I'll be teaching, I'm going to dive deep into all of that. So I won't really get into all of that tonight, but I will definitely for that 3-hour class or the 2-week class. But poly leaders are great because it's basically you're adding, you can have a floating poly leader, an intermediate sink poly leader, or a full sink poly leader. And it's basically you just do a loop to loop connection, and you are just, again, fishing different sections of the water column. So whenever I'm fishing, whether I'm swinging a fly or if I'm Euro nymphing, dry fly fishing, whatever it might be, I'm always thinking, where is my fly fishing? Where am I at within the water column? Or where should that fly naturally be within the water column? So, because of course you want your fly to be in the right part of the water column in order to catch the fish. So that's why you'd have different types of tips and different sinking or floating leaders that you could use based on whatever part of the water column you want to fish. So a Scandi head. So as I mentioned, there's several different types of heads for spey rods, but a Scandi head is one that floats. And so with these Scandi heads, you want that Scandi head again to be 2.5 times the length of your spey rod, but then the leader should be 1.5 times the length of your spey rod. So if you're using a floating line and you're using a floating leader, so if you have a 12-foot spey rod, you want it to, your leader will be 18 feet long. So the reason for that is because a tapered leader is going to allow the transfer of energy from your body to your fly rod, to your line, to your fly. And so if you have a longer tapered leader with these specific heads, the Scandi head, it's just going to allow for a better transfer of energy to your fly. It's just going to cast better. Now 18 feet seems really long, but you have a 12-foot rod. So it's definitely different than, you know, an average 9-foot fly rod. Now Skagit heads. So the way I think of Scandi versus Skagit is Scandi is going to be like fishing dry flies, right? It's top water, it's a floating line. Whereas a Skagit is where you're going to start to add some tips to it. So you're going to start to be fishing subsurface. So Scandi is dry fly, Skagit's going to be subsurface. So nymphing and or swinging wet flies, okay? And that's kind of how I differentiate between the two, kind of the easy way. Usually Skagit heads, they're thicker in diameter and they're shorter. And your leader, you typically want it to be anywhere from like 3 to 6 feet. I just use straight up mono and just, so just take my little, you know, Maxima and just, I'm 5 feet tall. So I just pull it out and then just tie it on. So, and that's going to be for single hand fishing as well. Your streamer leaders usually are going to be shorter in length than your other types of, you want to use a non-slip loop knot. So again, I use this non-slip loop knot for everything, dries, nymphs, wet flies, everything. Quick and easy. We do have a tutorial on our YouTube, the United on the Fly YouTube channel. If you haven't tied this knot, this is a great one to learn and also then to mentor others to learn it as well. It's a really, really good knot and it's very easy to use. If you take any classes with me, or if you fish with me, you're going to hear me say this a lot. Small flies catch big fish. Sometimes, yes, we want to cast, you know, or we think we need these big, huge flies. But if you look at this slide, these are all traditional spey flies and like traditional steelhead flies, and they're really small. So again, small flies catch big fish. And this isn't only for spey fishing. This is also for single hand. Like try the next time you're out, try a size 18, try a size 20, maybe even a 22. Try casting some smaller stuff. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised that small flies catch big fish. for sure. Because the fish don't know if you're fishing a $50 fly rod. They also don't know in most circumstances if that loop was 4 feet versus 2 feet, right? So I'll tell you this fish, but this is my first steelhead I ever caught on the swing. It was the worst cast I've ever made. And I just let it swing out there and I caught this beautiful fish. So again, fish all your casts and just, even if you think it's a bad cast, just fish it. I think you're going to be pretty surprised that. And I think what happened is I kind of dumped my cast, so the fly got deeper because it wasn't the best cast, and that's actually part of the water column that I needed to be anyways, so it actually worked out really well. So again, fish all your casts. You know, and spey fishing is cool because it's a great easy change of direction cast. So if you are single hand and or two-handed casting and you're swinging your fly down, it's hard to be able to pick up and change planes. You'd have to cast like 5 different times to get your fly upstream, whereas you can just lift it, do a snap T, and then go up. And this is going to be for nymph fishing, for, you know, even a single hand dry fly fishing. I use spey casts all the time, especially either a single hand spey and or a snap T. And this is just an example. This is a snap T. I'm single hand fishing. I'm dry fly fishing. And I'm just doing my single hand, my snap T. And then I'm just going to mend the line so that I'm dry fly fishing right now. So again, using a snap T is a great change of direction cast. So you can do this with both a single hand rod and also with a two-handed rod. And it's easy and it's fun. The other one is a snake roll. So this is a really fun, beautiful cast anyways. But when I'm casting a really long dry fly leader, for me, and especially if you look at how still this water is, this is my friend Bridget, when you look at how still this water is, when you're pulling that line in, it can disturb the water. And so in really still water, such as these circumstances, it's nice sometimes to pick it up, snake roll it, and then cast out. And I'll show you this, this video. So all she does, she picks up, does a little snake roll, cast out, and cast. That's it. So this is a really fun technique to learn. So here I am. This is a bamboo fly rod. That's why it's so wiggly. But I'll cast it down. So it's going to come in. I'll just do my snake roll right here. So I have a long cast, a long leader. There's a little bit of fish. I got to add a little fish. This is all single hand dry fly fishing, right? So you can do these same type of techniques and type of casts with a single hand or a two-handed rod. And the struggle's real. I'm 5'1.5" and I have T-Rex arms. So sometimes me trying to land my own fish can be difficult. But just again, using that snake roll for a long leader pickup, it's a great technique and it's really fun. So it's one to just practice on the coat or outside on the grass before you go out, but just give it a try. I think you'll enjoy it. Wind direction, oh my. So just as Demiesha was saying that she casted and got her fly in her hair, well, this, I'm so happy it was your hair and not your face. So, you know, really thinking about wind direction. So the one thing I want to say is make sure that your fly, or we'll call it your anchor, but your fly is down below you or in the same direction as the wind. Meaning if the river is going this way downstream and the wind is pushing downstream, then I'd make sure that my fly is going to be on the downstream side of me so I can cast. And the reason for that is because 2 reasons actually. First and foremost, I don't want the fly in my face, but also it doesn't collapse your D loop. So if you look at this photo, you can see that this is kind of a big D. And here's my fly. My fly's right here. So let's say that the wind was pushing downstream. I'd want my fly to be downstream of me because then the wind would be pushing the fly away from me versus pushing the fly to me. So you don't want it to collapse your D loop, because if it collapses that D loop, then that's really what is kind of keeping that tension and load of your fly rod. And if that D loop is collapsed, it's just not going to cast well. So having your fly in the same direction of the wind is imperative. So that means that you have to learn, you know, 4 basic casts for that. And those, I really won't talk really about all of those because it's that's more advanced, and we'll talk about that in our Spey Fishing Basics class. But just knowing the wind, your fly is in the same direction as the wind. It's a huge tip. So fishable water. So really the biggest thing that I want everyone to know, and this is with single hand and two-handed, is walking pace speed. So what I mean by that is like, if you're walking, right, like whatever pace you walk, whatever it might be, that's the pace that you're looking for, like to hold. So walking pace speed, if you're like have to run to keep up with the current, then it's probably too fast to fish. So that's really what I want everyone to kind of get amphitheater approach. And I do this with single hand casting as well, but you want to start really short. So there are times that only like a third of my head is even out. So I just cast it down, I swing it, and then I'll pull a little line out, and then I cast it, pull a little more line out. So this fish, my head was not even out yet, and it was that close to me. So that fish was literally like 20 feet out in front of me. And if I wasn't approaching it on an amphitheater and or like a working my way out approach, then I never would have caught that fish. So again, as I said, you don't have to, like one of the biggest misconceptions is you have to cast really far. And that's not true. Like I've caught so many fish really close. There are times when fish are way out there and I just physically can't get there, and that's okay. Those fish are lucky because I didn't touch them. But you know, so just cast and know that you don't have to cast super far. You're still going to be in the game. Depth acquisition or acquiring depth. So the cool thing about this specific type of fishing is you can angle, it's not going to be as deep, and 45 is just going to be kind of swinging right away and not really allow for any time for your fly to sink. So based on whatever type of fish you're targeting, so like king salmon, for instance, are really deep. They're deep down. So for me, I have to cast out at a 90-degree angle, take some steps just to try to get that line to be even deeper and then move down. So based on whatever species you're fishing for, and again, thinking about where in the water column am I fishing, that's how you would know like what angle or where am I going to try to cast. And this is something that you learn. This is something that you have your great mentors and teachers, or just give me a call and we can chat about it as well. And I'll go into much greater detail in the class about it. One of the biggest things, fish the hang down. So I know I was telling Shelly this, was, you know, like when I was with Lindsay last week on the Gallatin, we had a dry dropper. We were high sticking a dry. So we were dead drifting a dry. We swung it all the way through. And then at the very end, so the hang down is like when the fly is at the very end of the swing and it starts to kind of move up and down. Fish that, give that a little moment. I think you'll be really surprised at how many fish you'll catch on the hang down, because a lot of times maybe those fish might be coming in, they might be following it, or it's that specific movement at the end of the swing that they're kind of going up and down. So mimicking a mayfly emerger, a caddis pupa, or whatever species of fish you're targeting. And so fish that hang down. Okay, so hooking and landing a fish. So number one thing I do, this is my dad and I think about my landing zone. And I do this with single hand and two-handed fishing as well. So sure, because you know, I always try to think positively, not if I'm going to catch a fish, but when I'm going to catch the fish, where am I going to land that fish? And so this specific fish is in an area that we call Heartbreak Alley. And the reason for that is because you cast up above a bunch of rocks, and if you hook a fish, those fish go into the rocks, and it's really hard to land these fish. So we've had our hearts broken quite often in this specific run. So think about your landing zone. Where are you going to fish, and then where are you going to land that fish? And landing it in kind of calmer water is a good idea. So just always kind of looking ahead into the future, or not if you're going to catch a fish, but when you're going to catch the fish, how are you going to land it? And let the fish eat your fly. So I think that that's one of the biggest, you know, you might feel it and you're like, oh, you get all excited, you lift the rod, you do all kinds of stuff. So just let that fish eat it, let it commit. And this isn't a visual thing, this is a feeling thing. And it's hard sometimes to be like, oh, it's gonna eat it, it's gonna eat it. And then it doesn't eat it, or it definitely eats it. So once you feel it eat it, then you can set the hook, and usually it's to the side. But try not to trout set, especially with the Spey rod. That's a kind of a thing that I've learned way too. and you want to fight the fish with the rod butt. You have a 13-foot rod for a reason. So really, when you're fishing or fighting a fish, really get a good bend on that fly rod and really use the rod butt. It's just going to be easier and faster to bring in the fish. Using appropriate size tackle. So one of the biggest things, especially as anglers, thinking about ethically fishing as well as being conservationists, is knowing that if I'm going to be targeting steelhead, I want to have a larger fly rod that will be able to hook and land this fish faster. So I don't want to deplete all of its energy. I want it to have a good chance of survival. And so having appropriate size tackle is just truly important. I remember I saw a gentleman who had a 5-weight single hand fly rod. He caught this beautiful wild steelhead. It took him 60 minutes to land the fish. And I know that because I watched him and I actually helped net the fish for him because he had this little tiny baby trout net and I had a steelhead net. So I net the fish for him, and it just 60 minutes is way too long. So again, just using the appropriate size tackle is just really important. It's just ethically, because we want to be as good to the fish as we can, especially for practicing catch and release. And then start short and work your way out. So this is Whitney Gould. Whitney is the Women's World Spey Champion. So this woman can cast far. She can cast the furthest than any woman in the whole entire world. But the cool thing about Whitney, she's not only a really good caster, she's also a very good angler. And she knows that just because she can cast 150 feet doesn't mean that she needs to. So she casts short and she works her way out. So that's just a huge tip for single hand and also two-handed fishing. Trout set, something I've learned. And also enjoy and celebrate the bycatch, right? Like, sure, you might have been targeting, like here I was targeting rainbow trout and I got this beautiful grayling on a black leech. Like, oh my gosh, I want to celebrate that, or celebrate any size fish or whatever it is. Just celebrate that we're lucky and blessed to even be able to just, touch and thank these amazing creatures and then, send them on their way if that's so what you choose. So it's pretty cool. As Demiesha said, take a private lesson. I think one of the biggest things with especially spey fishing and spey casting is to really learn from somebody that's good, and somebody that's patient and somebody that is a good teacher. And this specific woman, this is Molly Semenik. She lives in Blaine, Washington, and she's the only woman in the entire world to have her single hand, her casting instructor, her master casting instructor, and her two-hand certifications. The only woman in the world. And she's my casting mentor. So I'm pretty blessed to have this woman in my life, not only as a mentor, but also as a friend. And so, reach out to her or reach out to a local area, your local fly shop, and really ask kind of those questions like what Demiesha asked, and really set your expectations, say, hey, if you want to learn, but you don't necessarily need to catch a fish, but you want to learn how to do it all yourself. You want to learn to become a better caster. You want to learn even just how to set up a fly rod or whatever it might be. I think setting those expectations with private lessons and or with a guide is important. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing to get a casting lesson for sure from somebody that's a good instructor. And we're almost done. Again, this is the class. So we're going to be going over all of this and diving deep into it so much more. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of spey, rods and reels. I'm going to go into all the backing, the running line, all the heads, sink tips and leaders, flies. I'll go through the casting terms and just the basic spey cast. And then week 2, I'll be talking about casting terms, the types. There's a touch and go, there's a sustained anchor cast, wind directions, common casting mistakes, fishing techniques. I mean, we're going to dive deep. And again, if this is of some interest to you, it's a great way to support Brown Girl Outdoor World, as well as learn some great things. Just another tool to put in your toolbox for fishing techniques. It's a really good class, and you'll have full access to all the recordings. So if you missed something, or if you want to go back and watch it for the rest of your life, then you have that as well. Just a huge thank you to both Demiesha and Jaeda. I can't say thank you enough for your time, your willingness to share, and just being mentors and being the future. It's awesome. It's so great. So Jaeda, thank you both again so much. I really
having
appreciate
us.
it, and your voice and just your mentorship and just you being you. So, and it's so cool that a daughter got a mom into fishing. This is like, that's so awesome.
I thank you for having us, Heather. I think like I've always looked at the United Women on the Fly like sessions, and I'm like, I should. And I think tonight just opened up the I'm going to for me, because it was just so there's so much information and so much like knowledge sharing that it's like definitely a space that I'll even introduce more to people to get to be on that journey. I know like a lot of the things at time is that we don't all have the same access to the same information. And if we can get that into a broader room and get more people at it from that angle, then we will have done good work.
Absolutely. Everyone should have access to education. So, and if that's one thing, especially like for my personal journey as well as with United, is that's what we want to give is easy, accessible information that's good, you know, and where everyone feels welcomed and everyone feels a part of that. So yeah, again, thank you
For the invite.
Yeah, thank you for joining, and thank you to everybody for your time and being along with us. And